I'm Ashton Addison from Blockwest Capital for Investment Pitch Media, and today on the Crypto Coin Show we have Kev Silk, the head of AppChains at Ankr. Kev, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Ashton. Pleasure to be here.
Likewise, excited to have Ankr back for the third time. In the past, we've talked about the liquid staking, and this time we're going to more focus on app chains and regulation as well, which I feel like is a very hot topic in cryptocurrency, hopefully for the positive as well at this time. But before we dive into Ankr, let's just start with a little bit on your background, how you got involved into Ankr, and then we'll dive into all the details.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been with Ankr for about 2 years now. Before that, I worked at a research firm called Gartner, all centered around blockchain. But Ankr was was probably my favorite token out of all the holdings that I had. And eventually I just got to a point where I didn't want to research blockchain. I wanted to actually get involved and start building it. So I got in touch with our head of product and our CEO and our CTO, and then eventually found my way with Ankr, and been here ever since. So it's been 2 years, felt like 6 in a good way, but yeah, that's how I got here.
That's amazing. It's a great story to hear when it's one of your favorite tokens and you just reach out to, and it's like a dream job, right? It's not even a job because you enjoy what you're doing. And I've been following Ankr for the past few years as well, since you joined. And I know that they're doing a lot of different things in the space. For people that aren't familiar with Ankr, could you give a high level on sort of what is Ankr and its mission?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ankr's a blockchain infrastructure provider, and the way that I like to describe us is essentially the first thing that developers need when they want to build in the blockchain space is a high quality endpoint and connection to the blockchain. Mm-hmm. And that's where Ankr comes in. So we're one of the largest RPC node blockchain infrastructure providers. Around any given month, we'll have about 50 million unique IPs utilizing our RPC endpoints. And we support over 30 EVM and non-EVM chains. So the Ankr token serves as the means of payment for our MRPC customers. But I guess super high level, I like to look at Ankr as almost like a developer hub of tools that enable Web3 to build out and expand, really focusing on empowering developers to reach their full potential with high quality and distributed blockchain infrastructure.
Incredible. And I really feel that we need to emphasize the importance of the development ecosystem, because there's so many developers in the world that are still working on Web 2, have yet to dip their feet into Web 3. And if there are different ways we can make it easier, whether it's spinning up a blockchain node, as you mentioned, or just developing apps, making pathways to make it easier to do that is just going to accelerate the adoption of Web 3 quicker into the real world.
1000%. At the end of the day, it all comes down to empowering developers to reach their full potential. And it goes for that in any industry, right? It's like if we really want to build the best possible products, the best possible services, whatever it may be, you have to empower developers of any kind with the best infrastructure possible to really attract consumers to get there. And that's where Ankr comes in. And that's part of the reason why Ankr was my favorite token and why I wanted to be here, because I wanted to be involved with the infrastructure layer, right? Like I wanted to be involved with actually empowering developers building all types of projects, whether it's, DeFi, supply chain, insurance, social media, Web3 gaming, whatever it may be. I wanted it to be on the base layer, the infrastructure layer, and build out the infrastructure that's going to empower these developers to build high quality user experiences and decentralized applications. And that's really our mission at Ankr.
And with decentralized applications, the more decentralized applications, the better, but they also need to be usable and easy to create. And now I know you're the head of AppChains at Ankr, and I'm curious on the details behind AppChains versus apps. And can you just explain AppChains to the viewers who aren't familiar?
Yeah, I think I should probably start with what an AppChain is in general, and then where Ankr's AppChain product comes in. Essentially, what an AppChain is it's an application-specific blockchain, right? It's a single blockchain that hosts one single application or business. So when you look about, take a look at blockchain over the last 10 to 12 years, most layer ones they started with building the protocol and infrastructure layer of their blockchain, right? So they started with the infrastructure, and then from there, they hoped that it would attract developers to build their applications on top of it. Now, the trade-off with that is these developers, they had predetermined governance, predetermined specs, predetermined programming languages, consensus mechanisms, right? Now, the AppChain thesis takes a little bit of a different approach, right? So rather than start with the infrastructure layer of the protocol, we start with the application. And then we build the infrastructure around what that application or business needs to be successful. So it's dedicated infrastructure that allows them to create, that allows them to build, grow, and scale, which allows them to attract more consumers, increase their user experience, increase their revenue. And it's really just catered to their specific needs. Now, where Ankr's AppChain product comes in is we actually build that specific infrastructure for the developer, right? So they don't have to focus on building block explorers, building RPC nodes, validator nodes, test nets, faucets, right? That's where we come in, and we build that infrastructure for them so that they can just focus on building their application, building their business, and attracting consumers. Because at the end of the day, that's what it should be. They should be focused on the project rather than the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's great that there's that suite of products that have already been built beforehand to like make it easy for the developers to just start working on an app chain. And what I saw in the recent news was that there was also a partnership with AppChains and the Microsoft Azure sort of more Web 2 development infrastructure. So with that I feel like that would open up the doors to millions probably of Web 2 developers. Can you talk about that partnership and what that means for AppChains and Web 3?
Yeah, it's something that we're very excited about. And to your point, it's something that's going to open the doors for our top developer talent to move into Web3, because essentially what's occurring here is that we're putting Ankr's blockchain infrastructure at front and center of Microsoft's Azure marketplace, which is now going to be available to the millions of developer customers that they have. And it's an interesting story how it started. And it was exciting when it occurred, because basically Microsoft told us, their Web 2 customers, their Web 2 developers, they were eager to start building and exploring the Web 3 space. So, we realized the market and the demand was there. Azure has all this, incredible talent using their marketplace. So the opportunity to work with Microsoft and together onboard developers to Web 3, it fit like a glove. And I mean, we're not dependent on cloud, right? But by partnering with cloud organizations like Microsoft, we're really, how I view it is, we're increasing the blockchain adoption rate, because when you attract that top developer talent, you're empowering them to build high quality user experiences in the Web3 space, which ultimately increases the adoption of Web3 consumerism, which over time will decrease the amount of volatility in cryptocurrency prices and increase the usability of the projects.
And for the developers that are using the Azure marketplace already, and just for other Web 2 developers who aren't using the Microsoft product but they're interested in getting into Web 3, could you explain the process, or how easy it is once it's on that Azure store to start building an app chain?
It's a lot more simple and easy now than it was a couple years ago when we started. When you look at the evolution of Ankr's AppChain product, it ultimately started with developers going to our sales team and saying, hey, we want to build on, this L1 or this L2. And then our sales team would go and figure out, okay, what infrastructure do they need, right? Depending upon, what mother chain they were building on, whether it was a Binance side chain or a Polygon supernet or an Avalanche subnet. Then my team and I would come in and we begin building it. We'd begin building the block explorers, the RPC nodes, the validator nodes, and we'd update them on the entire process. Typically it would take around 2 to 3 weeks to build the test net, and then from there maybe 2 to 3 weeks to build the mainnet to deploy it. But now it's as simple as going to Microsoft Azure Marketplace or Ankr.com, and you're staying on the UI the entire time. You don't necessarily have to speak to anyone. You basically plug in the information about your business or your application that you're building. Then if you're on Microsoft Azure, you have 3 different package offerings that we have on there, that goes by specific infrastructure based on the size of the organization. And then if you're on Microsoft Azure, you can pay with credit card or through Azure credits. And then if you're on Ankr.com, we have the AppChain configurator, which ultimately allows the developer to customize what specific infrastructure they need within their app chain, regardless of what mother chain they're building on. And then we start building it for them, and they can pay in Ankr tokens or in credit cards. So ultimately, it's a very efficient process, and that's something that we are continuously trying to improve as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great to hear that there's so many different options, not just in the way they build it, but the way that they pay as well. I feel like there are even developers that they're sort of skeptical on the currency side or the volatility of it, and they need to get in traditional means. And then once they get familiar with it, or once they build their first app chain, then all of a sudden it clicks for them, and they're like, oh, yeah. I understand the benefit of both the apps and the currency inside of it as well.
Exactly. I think some of it is psychological, right? We're moving into a new era of payments. We're going to a new era of building. We're going to a new era of utilizing applications on the internet. So it's not only a learning curve for the consumers, it's a learning curve for the developers. Mm-hmm. And our goal is to make it as simple as possible.
Mm-hmm. And when there is a continued influx of new Web3 developers creating new decentralized applications, what do you foresee in potential crypto regulations around that might affect the adoption of these apps, rapidly, or if there's currencies involved and whatnot? I feel like the regulation is a hot topic right now, and more so on the token side, but on the Web3 app side, I feel like there could be inhibitors to massive adoption.
Yeah, I think that regulation is probably one of the hot topics around our industry. It's been that way for a long time now. It's very dependent on which country you're living in and the types of entities that are governing this industry. I think it can be pretty subjective, but my personal opinion is that once we get to the point where those who are regulating this industry can migrate their thinking from, okay, every single coin or token is a security, to some of these are securities, some of these are commodities. And at least in the US, I believe that the SEC shouldn't be the ones regulating crypto. I actually think it makes a lot more sense for the CFTC, because it's a new technology class and it needs more of an open framework. And the CFTC, they follow a principles-based regulatory framework rather than the rules-based framework of the SEC, right? Like a rules-based framework, you could look at it like regulation by enforcement. It's basically, the SEC says, this is what you can do and this is what you can't do. Whereas a principles-based regulation, the CFTC it's much more flexible. There's a high level principles that companies have to follow, and it gives these companies the freedom to build and create without being, afraid of getting unjustly sued, right? And it benefits everyone because the companies benefit. They can build, grow, and scale with a blueprint to follow without fear of just being sued out of the blue. It benefits the consumer, right? Because now that these companies can innovate freely, it allows the consumer to actually get attracted and use high quality blockchain dApps and learn the technology through experience, and that's key. And then lastly, it benefits the economies of these countries that regulate crypto fairly, right? It increases liquidity, it increases jobs, new revenue streams, which ultimately increases GDP. So I think at the end of the day, it's important to regulate, but regulate fairly. And I think the right entities need to be the ones regulating it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kev, and bringing up the CFTC and commodities. And it just seems like, the de facto regulator just happened to be the SEC, but who said, they're the ones? They just sort of took a stand and started throwing the hammer down on different companies and sort of spreading fear of things that hadn't really been decided yet. until a court case actually determined it. And what we saw in the recent news with XRP, it looks like XRP actually won on that side and said, we're not a security, and this is one of those top cryptocurrencies that has been under the radar for many years now, under this regulatory battle, and I feel like that might set a precedent for a lot of the other coins that are similar and smaller and ones that are doing more innovation. These smaller cap coins and Web3 developers that are working on building the next financial infrastructure right now.
Yeah, and I think it benefits the industry as a whole. Like whether you're a massive fan of XRP or you're not a fan, I think that win definitely helps our industry collectively, right? And it takes a lot of courage for XRP to go through this almost two and a half year long lawsuit, right? To battle the SEC, who has a pretty impressive record prior to this last defeat that they suffered. So I definitely hope that the US can adopt some fair crypto regulation. There's a lot of other countries out there that are starting to do so. So I hope that they take notice, and that's something that occurs in the future.
Definitely. And it seems like in a similar way that some of these emerging economies sort of skipped a few levels when they didn't have the traditional financial infrastructure that's sort of against innovation. They're able to adopt new technology faster. I feel like with how quickly Web3 is growing and digital assets, some of these countries that regulate fairly or are more open to innovation will probably benefit more. Do you have any insights into how will these countries and the citizens that are living in them benefit from being open to regulating fairly?
Yeah, I think it's a loaded question that I think we can dive into. I mean, I like to look at it from a macroeconomic perspective, right? Because that's really what will relate to people the most. Excuse me. There's things to consider, right? Like what types of countries will regulate crypto fairly and why they'll do so. Mm-hmm. And I personally think it's those emerging countries that you had mentioned, right? The countries that are on the rise, they'll be the ones who benefit. And that actually reminds me, there's a book by Ray Dalio. I think it's his latest book called The Changing World Order. Mm. And he talks about the different phases that countries go through over time. And he goes through their rise, which is really those emerging countries right now, goes through their top and then their decline. And he talks about he almost gives like a ranking system, and he evaluates these countries in those three phases on, things like leadership capabilities and education levels. And then a key one, which was openness to global thinking. And that's really openness to innovation. And it's the countries that are on the rise, at least according to Dalio in that book, they're the ones, they're open to global thinking. And that's important because that's where blockchain and crypto come into play, right? Like being open to global thinking includes being open to technology and new inventions. And the countries that do that, I think, short-term benefits, they'll attract the top developer talent because these developers, they'll see a fair and just framework to build where innovation won't be hindered. And then when you go into like overall benefits of that, those developers, they'll build the best applications, and it'll increase the number of jobs in the country. It'll increase the share of world trade. They'll diversify their revenue, which increases their liquidity and boosts their economy. Their GDP rises. And then their consumers will begin truly utilizing cryptocurrencies and blockchain networks through experiencing them. And that's key. And then you can look at it from a long-term perspective, right? As the citizens of these countries, their education on blockchain is through experiencing them. Eventually, they'll grow up with blockchain, just like we did with the internet. And it's the countries who regulate this fairly will allow their citizens to grow up using the technology, and those citizens will be the ones who eventually make it even better and innovate it even further, right? Like just like Zuckerberg and Dorsey and Musk, they innovated the internet that they grew up in, right? That is the opportunity that's on the table for these countries.
It's a great insight, Kev, and the Ray Dalio's part about global viewpoints and global perspectives, I think is super important. And from the recent interview with the CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink, he said it best, and it was quite a bullish statement, saying the the demand for these digital assets will be like nothing we've ever seen before because of the global demand. And it's just an asset that's transcending all borders. And looking at these countries that are not regulating in a fair way, they might be left in the dust when the other countries sort of move forward. And I think that the U.S. is sort of on the top of that list, depending on how much they continue to fight back against the innovation of Web3.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it doesn't stay that way, but it's something that I think the industry is considering, and there's going to be ramifications for those countries that aren't open to global thinking, because when they're not open to global thinking, they're not open to crypto and regulating this technology fairly. It's basically like they're being offered a world of new possibilities, a world of new economic activity, increased GDP. And they're looking at it and they're saying, nope, no thanks, we're all set. So what happens with that? Well, you lose out on that top talent. They won't move to your jurisdiction. Eventually, it'll be a lack of innovation, a lack of competitiveness in the global market. It's a missed opportunity to diversify their revenue. And there'll be a decrease in global world trade as well, and then a missed opportunity to foster the next generation of blockchain inventors, as I'd mentioned before. So the ramifications are pretty large. And I mean, I think that countries notice that, and I do hold on hope that the states will, take a look at other places like Hong Kong or Japan or even the UK. They're slowly starting to realize that this technology isn't going anywhere and there's massive benefits for it. So I hope that the US follows suit.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Me too. And I'm curious on, well, first, actually, I wanted to say that, since 2020 and the amount of people working remote has just increased significantly. And I feel like with blockchain companies especially, it doesn't really matter what country they're in for the most part. A lot of these countries, or a lot of these companies, are working with workers in different countries, and they never really meet up physically. So it could be beneficial to have these developer hubs in some of these countries that are regulating fairly and they're open to innovation. Now, I'm curious, with Ankr's infrastructure, is the platform set up to help top talent in all of these different countries and these emerging countries that we're talking about?
Yeah, good question. So first off, absolutely. We set up our infrastructure a little bit differently than other infrastructure providers. Most infra providers, or at least in Web3, they use cloud services. We took a little bit of a different approach. For years, we've been deploying bare metal servers in distributed locations all over the world. And just recently, we started moving to the cloud space to really diversify that infrastructure. But when you take a look at, bare metal, this means that our nodes are closer to our developer customers and their consumers all over the world. Mm-hmm. We're across 6 continents and over 25 countries. Wow. So what this allows us to do is offer super trustworthy, fast, and reliable connections to these blockchains, over 30 of them, which offers fast response times and lower latency to our developer customers. Then as a result, they're able to offer the same thing to their consumers. Right? It allows them to build high quality applications that will attract those consumers. Mm-hmm. It's the same approach we're taking with empowering developers to reach their full potential. And that's what we're doing. We care about having, high quality and very distributed infrastructure all across the world.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing to hear. And looking forward towards the rest of 2023 and into next year, what else is in the roadmap and the plans for growing Ankr and bringing more assets for developers to work with?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, from a technology perspective, we're continuously innovating, adding new types of developer tools to our tech stack. There's not a whole lot I can say there outside of just be on the lookout over the next 3 to 4 months. Mm-hmm. I know that our community is eagerly awaiting for a few announcements that are coming very soon. But outside of that, it's just continuing to grow the Ankr business, right? We're going to continue to partner with some other major cloud providers that will be public sometime in the near future. And then it's just extending our distribution. right? Like we have the high quality and speed within our infrastructure. Now it's just continuously distributing it all across the world. That's key for us. So it's just continuing to build, grow, and scale the business, and continue to, provide developers with the best building experience.
Amazing. And I feel like there's a lot of other places and Web2 marketplaces and developer hubs that from traditional developers that have learned code over the last 30 years that are still haven't touched Web3. There's many more avenues to open to bring them into the next evolution of the internet.
1000%. There's a boatload of developer talent out there, and we just need to, help make it easier for them to join the Web3 space. That's what we're doing with Microsoft, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Amazing. And is there any other last words or information that you want to provide to the listeners and the readers?
No, I would say for the developers out there, they can go to Ankr.com or Azure Marketplace to reach our developer tech stack of tools. And then to the consumers, I would say that, we're dedicated to, empower the developers who are building your projects to be able to do so in the most efficient way. So continue to utilize blockchain networks, continue to utilize cryptocurrencies in a way that, you're learning through experience. And then over time, this industry won't be so niche. It will become even more mainstream. In fact, actually, I went to go see Mission Impossible last night. The new one, and no spoiler alerts, but there's a couple of cryptocurrency and blockchain references in it. I thought that was pretty cool to see. I think they could have done a little bit better job of describing, where the cryptocurrency was or like what blockchain they were tapping into. But nevertheless, it was cool to see just our industry getting mentioned in a high profile movie like that. So mass adoption is coming. It's just we have to stay strong and continue to innovate.
Amazing. Thank you so much for all the insights, Kev, and for helping out the developers in the traditional world, the tens of millions of developers that are one click away from creating an app chain and utilizing the blockchain. And then that's one step away from tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people starting to use Web3 apps, and they won't even know it, and they won't even have to know about the underlying infrastructure. They'll just be using the technology to benefit them in a way that Web2 could not before. So I'm really looking forward to it. I will leave the links to Ankr and the Azure Marketplace, as you mentioned, in the description box below, as well as some of the socials that people can check out Ankr's information. All the best with all the updates moving forward on Ankr, and let's follow up in the near future.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Ashton.